/Berkshire. On BBC Radio Berkshire, we're about to meet a Tory boy. John Walsh, a BAFTA-nominated filmmaker, has also run for Parliament. You might remember, if you were paying attention at the back there, Pike, back in April he joined me in the studio and he was talking about not only rescuing old films from oblivion for the big companies like Universal, but also the time back in 2010, the previous general elections, the one we just had, he turned his back on Labour, he'd been a lifelong supporter, and he contested the safe Labour seat of Middlesbrough as a Conservative. A fascinating story and film. It's out now on DVD. When he came in the last time, we couldn't talk too much about it because we were in the run-up period for the general election. He can now say all and tell all about his time as a Tory candidate, even though he's traditionally, and in his heart, a Labour supporter. Also on BBC Radio Berkshire. Now, back in April, I was joined on the station, in the studio, by a filmmaker who's been doing something vital, if you're a cinephile, a film lover, rescuing material from being lost forever. He was doing it for the big studios, the likes of Universal. His name is John Walsh. He's a BAFTA-nominated filmmaker, but he's also, full stop in the paragraph, run for Parliament. Back in 2010, he turned his back on Labour, he'd been a lifelong supporter, and ran against Labour in the safe Labour seat of Middlesbrough for the Conservatives. He filmed his campaign, and although he didn't win the seat, he increased the Tory vote in the constituency to its highest in 30 years. He also revealed and started some controversy around the then-sitting Labour MP. The film's called Tory Boy the Movie. John Walsh is the man behind it. We couldn't talk about it in any detail the last time he was in case it prejudiced the general election. We were in the run-up to the election period, had to be fair and even-handed. Of course we did. Everybody was. And John joins us again now to tell all. Hello, John.
Afternoon, Paul.
So first of all, remind us about what it was going through your political mind that prompted you to do this back in 2010. Were you dissatisfied with Labour?
I was. I was dissatisfied on the level that most Labour voters were. But additionally, I'd just come off the back of a documentary I'd made with Gordon Brown at Number 10 called The Prime Minister's Global Fellowship. And I think that was the final straw for me. We'd been treated, not terribly well.
What, by the Prime Minister and his team?
But by the team, yes, by the political team, not the civil service team. They were very nice, because there's a civil service and a political team that sort of run side by side in Number 10. And
what was it that the political team did that rubbed you up the wrong way?
They were quite unpleasant, actually. Effectively, they bullied my production team that were making this documentary. They were making it with the British Council, the Department of Education, and Number 10. And
so it should have been perfectly user-friendly then? There was nothing controversial about it?
No, absolutely. It's almost like a corporate video in a sense. I was asked to do this because I make gap year documentaries about young people. So that was really bad news to come out of it a bit battered and bruised.
Were they trying to kind of dictate what you filmed, or were they worried about questions you might ask?
No, it's absolutely the opposite. I was brought on because of my extensive knowledge in this area, and it was ignored across the board. And the various safety procedures I put in place to make sure we got what we needed were ignored. So, of course, when they didn't get what they wanted, they sort of were stamping their feet and saying, well, why has this not turned out the way we expected?
Because you idiots, you didn't let me do my job, was going through your mind, no doubt.
Absolutely. And it made me wonder if that was at the very top of government, the very seat of power, and they weren't listening to advice they were paying a lot of money for, then how must they be running the country?
So how did that transform itself into your bid for a Conservative seat in the Labour-safe stronghold?
I was making a documentary for the BBC called Sofa Surfers for Children's BBC. I was on Breakfast News. I was having a chat about it. It went very, very well with Bill Turnbull and so on. And in the green room, there was some people saying, oh, you spoke very well. You should come and join us, thinking they were perhaps a homeless charity or maybe Jehovah's Witness. They were the Conservatives.
No, they were even more desperate than that. They were the Tory party.
They were. I was shocked. And David Cameron had just opened the list up for anyone with any interest but no experience to come and join the party. I was a fan of David Cameron because I liked what he said. I was sceptical of the party at the time. And I thought, well, hang on, if this is true, anyone can apply. Let's see, I'm anyone. I've got no party allegiances per se.
So you've never been a member of the Labour Party, but instinctively you were a Labour supporter?
I'd always voted Labour. Every term I could vote since I was sort of 18, 19, I voted, and it was always Labour.
OK, so you go to Middlesbrough and you're selected. What was that process like?
Well, before that, there was a 5-hour selection at the Moller Centre in Cambridge to decide if you are a Conservative enough to go on the Conservative Party list. 5,000 people applied in that sort of massive sort of scoop up of people, and only a couple of hundred emerged. I was one of those. It's up to you then to apply for seats that are available. So you're not given Middlesbrough. You have to sort of apply like a job.
And of course, I suppose if you're a newbie relatively, without Tory party connections, it's unlikely you'll get, say, Boris Johnson's old seat, Henley, because that will be regarded for the Tory diehards who've kind of almost earned the right of a safe seat.
You could think that. It's just that when I applied onto the list, it was only the non-safe seats, if you like, that were left. So I applied 18 months before the previous election in 2010, so there weren't any safe seats to be had. And when I went to Middlesbrough, I didn't expect to be selected. There were 8 other people who were being interviewed, all of which were from the local area, half of which had political connections and experience. I was, if you like, the least favourite candidates on paper.
They must have been truly terrible. I must say, let's be honest. They must have been useless.
That's nice. That's nice. Very funny. Actually, the other way of looking at it, which is what actually happened, was that as the outside candidate, I was able to say to them, "Look, you've chosen an insider before. It hasn't worked. I'm from the other side. I'm from Labour, so I'll give you that London perspective, and I'm from television."
He's good. This guy. He's good. We should select him. That's a great answer. That really, without being patronising, that is a great answer because, of course, other people in the past have tried and failed against the Labour incumbent, and you're from outside that loop.
Absolutely. So you've tried the rest. Now, if you like, try somebody else. And it seemed to work because they had the local knowledge, which I could plug straight into. And I had television knowledge. I was able to make, if you want to call them, documentary leaflets. So instead of printed leaflets, I made short films about the area, about the Cora Steel closure, about Chris Rea.
And were these on the internet? Were these on the internet then as well? You could use social media by this time?
Yes, that's right. They were on a YouTube channel, and there was a short film about the Labour MP, the late Sir Stuart Bell, about the fact that he's never in the town, hasn't held surgeries for 15 years, and lives in Paris, if you don't mind.
Okay, we're going to find out what happened after that. So that was the man he was up against. We're going to find out how he got on and the controversy that ensued following that election after a bit of this. So let's return to John Walsh, BAFTA award-winning filmmaker and parliamentary candidate, who is midway telling us his saga of his story about 2010, the election when he stood, although a Labour supporter, as a Tory candidate against the incumbent MP, Sir Stuart Bell, who you just said to us, John, welcome back, by the way, you said... Hello. Had not held a surgery in his constituency for 12 years, and by the way, although he copped for a nice fee from the English Parliament, lived in Paris. What had been going on there?
It was actually 15 years, yes. Well, he just, I suspect, got disillusioned with the whole process and met people less and less. But, you know, there's no legal obligation for MPs to meet with constituents because there's no job description. So what my film uncovered was, if you like, 30 years of neglect because he'd been an MP there for that long. When the film finally came out, what happened was I came back to London. I had 72 hours of footage. I didn't intend making a feature documentary, but when we cut it all together, we found we had something more than just a half-hour programme. So Fremantle Media helped me sort of put it together, and it went into cinemas and was nominated for a Grierson Award.
And not just that, it provoked a huge amount of not only local controversy, but national controversy, because you increased the Tory vote to almost a 20% share. You came in third in the election, but Stuart Bell remained the MP for Middlesbrough. What kind of outcry though, did your film provoke?
It provoked a lot. I mean, he kind of held on. He whittled down an enormous majority to a much smaller one. All the papers, I mean, the Independent, all the broadsheets and the local papers kind of held him to book. There was a local paper called the Evening Gazette, and a journalist there came along. He saw my film, was perhaps sceptical of what I was saying, and so he put it to the test himself and rang Sir Stuart's office 100 times over 100 days, and none of the calls were returned. So it caused...
Had he been cut off? Had he not paid his phone bill? What's going on?
Well, he just clearly wasn't replying to constituents. And the process kicked in then because there was so much negative press about it. The then leader, Ed Miliband, asked him to come in and see the chief whip, Rosie Winterton. And that process is meant to be a bit like going to see the headmaster if you've done something wrong. So it's a safeguard at the top of the party to sort of control, you know, wayward MPs.
And people can lose the whip, can't they? They can be effectively barred for a while from the party.
You can, or maybe completely, if like Eric Joyce, who was in a bit of a fracas, he lost the whip and so on. But of course, what happened with Sir Stuart Bell is he went to see Ed Miliband and Rosie Winterton and more or less said, this is the way I'm going to continue. You can't tell me how to run my constituency life. And that was it. So more or less, if you like, proverbially put 2 fingers up to them. And I think that created a bigger problem because he was then sort of isolated within the party. So the whip wasn't removed, but he'd really isolated himself. But then things took a tragic turn a couple of years later, and Sir Stuart Bell, the story, as it were, came to a head.
Sadly, he passed away, of course, from pancreatic cancer, but you had given him, of course, you had a right to reply, and there was a kind of follow-up film, wasn't there? A Tory Boy, The Aftermath. What did Sir Stuart have to say for himself in that?
Well, we thought it was very fair because I'm a program maker. I've made programs for television. It's vitally important that I'm the subject and the maker of this program, that other people get a right of reply and a chance to hold my feet to the fire because I'm not perfect. And Sir Stuart Bell said the allegations were untrue, they were unfounded. And despite the fact that the Gazette rang him on 100 occasions, he said that it wasn't his obligation to answer and log all telephone calls. So in his own eyes, he felt he hadn't done anything wrong. And in one of his last television interviews, he actually says that it won't look very good on my headstone, the epitaph that, I'm Britain's laziest MP. Little did he know, a few months later, he'd actually be dead.
Well, obviously, our thoughts are with his family for that. It was 3 years ago. He died from pancreatic cancer. Where can people see this film now and the follow-up film? It's Tory Boy, the movie. Is it out on DVD, John?
It is, yeah. The film got released briefly again in cinemas in the lead up to the election. And I was showing it for free in schools and colleges, and it is now available on DVD from all of the usual outlets.
And it was banned in Middlesbrough this year, wasn't it?
It was outrageously. The Student Union in Middlesbrough asked me in December of last year to have a screening of the film. I went through all of the external speakers' compliance notes so that I was fair and non-partisan in terms of the screening. And I recommended they have someone to referee it there and perhaps have, other people representing the other parties. It was all agreed, it was all signed off. And at the very last minute, Middlesbrough Council put a call into the university and basically told them, you have to axe this, which is a real shame because it
on
denied
what possible grounds, though? Given that there's going to be a free and fair debate, and we're a country that's sort of, the last time I checked, about something called, you may not have heard of this, John, they haven't in Middlesbrough, freedom of speech.
Absolutely. Well, the excuse they gave, or the reason they gave, was that they felt it wouldn't be impartial, given that the fact there's an election in the town. But I wasn't standing. So Stuart Bell, sadly, is no longer with us. So actually, it wouldn't have affected the results. And other schools and colleges up and down the country have seen the film. So they wrongly stood behind the broadcasting rules, which we have to abide by, about fair balance and so on. They hid behind the if you like, the curtain tails of that.
Yeah, the Representation of the People Act, effectively. Yeah.
Yes, which is a shame because they've denied the students in the town the place where I'm most needed to have my feet held to the fire because I criticise what's gone on in the town. They've been denied that, which is a real shame.
The film's called Tory Boy, the movie. There's also Tory Boy, the Aftermath. I'm sure you can check it out via Tinternet, but also it's now available on DVD. Huge thanks for speaking to us for that catch-up. John Walsh, their BAFTA-nominated filmmaker and prospective parliamentary candidate, open brackets, Conservative, close brackets, for Middlesbrough. He didn't make it, but the story is absolutely fascinating on BBC Radio Berkshire.
What should I write?